Hello, my friends. Dragons! Everybody loves dragons, right? They're gigantic, intimidating, breathe fire sometimes, and they even get their own Pokemon type. They can even be apple pies. It was first introduced as a rare type that was only weak to Ice and Dragon and strong against Dragon, with a resistance to the main four special types of Fire, Water, Grass, and Electric. Kind of its own isolated type with only 3 Pokemon options, but it has since become a fearsome group of Mons. In this year, in February of 2024, the Year of the Dragon commences. Last year for the Year of the Rabbit, I did a look at every rabbit Pokemon and I thought it was good fun. So this time, I could look at every single dragon Pokemon, but yeah, there are currently 75 technical dragons. That would get monotonous pretty quick, I think. So then I thought, what else could I do? Top 10 favorite dragons? Maybe, but then it hit me. Dragon is one of the strongest types overall in the Pokemon series. Many of them are legendaries or pseudo-legendaries and generally tend to make their way on a lot of teams in some form. They're gigantic, intimidating, breathe fire sometimes, as I already stated. So what if we look at the opposite end of the spectrum there? Who are the absolute weakest dragons in all of Pokemon? The Yang to the Yin and one of the better regarded types. It should be fun. So with that said, and as you saw in the title of the video, I wanted to go generation by generation and see who the weakest dragons are in each. Also, I think weakest can be both a little objective and subjective. You can literally rank them by their stats to find a statistical ranking, and that is what I intend to go by, but the movesets also absolutely can play into this as well, and a lot of that is dependent on your playstyle. Such is the beauty of Pokemon though. So this will just be a list judging them by base stat totals alone. If you want to argue against one being weaker than what I picked, so be it. I'm just here to celebrate the Year of the Dragon, yo. Just in a bit of an unconventional way, I guess. I'll be doing a brief statistical comparison and then just kind of talking about their design inspiration and naming and all that stuff that I usually do in these videos, as well as checking out their movesets for their respective generation. And again, I am getting all of this information from Bulbapedia. I do not claim to be an expert, and if you feel like I missed something, I'm just talking about what I read. Generation 1. So, I mean, there really isn't much to debate with this one at all. It's clearly Dratini. The only dragons that existed originally were Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite. So, I mean, there you go. It may seem like Charizard, Seadra, and Gyarados should be dragons, but that would be silly, right? From strongest to weakest, we get Dragonite at a base stat total of 600, Dragonair at 420, and Dratini at 300. Keep in mind that this is Gen 1, so Special was originally grouped into one category, so these totals are the current take. Dratini is a pure dragon type who debuted in Red, Green, and Blue, who was found in the Safari Zone by fishing with a Super Rod, or by purchasing one in the Game Corner. It's definitely not a water type, so it's pretty interesting that you can only find it in the wild by fishing. Weirdly enough, it can learn more water moves than Dragon though, as Dragon Rage was originally the only Dragon move. It kinda gave the line more of a mysterious feel to it. Dragon Rage only ever does 40 damage, so it's kinda like the Dragon type was quite underutilized originally. Dragonite is one of the strongest in Gen 1, but it's not because of its Dragon-specific moves. But the original Pokédex entry for Dratini says that it's long considered to be a mythical Pokemon until recently when a small colony was found living underwater. And that water just being the very public Safari Zone in the back of Fuchsia City. Statistically, it's actually pretty well rounded, with attack just slightly being its best and HP being its worst. The design for Dratini is based on a sea serpent, with a reminder that it is not a water type, as well as the Ryu, which are traditional Chinese and Japanese dragons. It's also similar to a snake, and its mythical nature being like the Loch Ness Monster. The name Dratini is a combination of dragon and teeny, or tiny and mini. It evolves into Dragonair at 30, and finally Dragonite at 55. And yeah, Dratini is the first part of the 3-part evolution, so naturally it's going to be the weakest there. It has an okay moveset of knowing Wrap and Leer off the bat, but it also learns one move every 10 levels, which is kinda cool, and it can learn a lot of pretty strong TMs. It's a pure dragon type, so we get the standard type effectiveness chart here, no fairy type yet. There really isn't a whole lot else to say about it. It's the weakest of the 3 options in Gen 1, while still not being that bad at all, especially for a first stage. Generation 2. Gen 2. There is even less to debate here than in Gen 1 even, because they only introduced one single Dragon Pokemon in Gen 2. Kingdra is an additional evolution to Horsea and Seadra that was a new surprise if you attached a Dragon Scale to Seadra and then traded it. And yeah, Kingdra is not weak at all, far from it, with a base stat total of 540. So it's kinda funny to include it here, but there are no other options. Kingdra is a water dragon type who originally debuted in Gold and Silver, with its original Pokedex entry stating that it hides in underwater caves, sleeps on the ocean floor, can cause whirlpools just by yawning, and can cause tornadoes when it wakes up. Statistically, its best stat is a 4-way tie between attack, defense, special attack, and special defense, with HP being its worst. And because of its primary water typing, the normal weakness to ice that Dragon has is omitted here. Kingdra is only weak to Dragon up until Fairy is introduced, and it resists Steel, Fire, and Water. Its design is based on a seahorse or a weedy sea dragon. There is also a Japanese myth that a seahorse living for a century will turn into a dragon, which is kinda cool that it's an added evolution to Seadra from Gen 1. It being able to cause whirlpools is based on the Japanese sea deity of Ryujin, as well as the Greek monster Charybdis. It being able to shoot ink from its snout is similar to a squid and a water gun. The name Kingdra is a combination of king and dragon, as well as Hydra. So let's be honest, Kingdra should never be included in a weakest dragons video, but I made these 1 per generation rules myself. This was my mistake and I refuse to correct it. Kingdra simply is the weakest Gen 2 dragon because it's the only dragon, but also it's one of the strongest Gen 2 Pokemon in general. It learns a variety of water moves by leveling up, as well as the new Gen 2 dragon move of Twister. Yeah, let's just move on because Kingdra is actually pretty awesome. Generation 3. But ooh boy, we do actually get some more options here for Gen 3, 9 of them to be exact. The dragons here are Vibrava, Flygon, Altaria, Bagon, Shelgon, Salamence, Latias, Latios, and Rayquaza. According to the base stat totals going from strongest to weakest, it goes Rayquaza at the top with 680, and then a 3-way tie between Latias, Latios, and Salamence at 600, then Flygon at 520, Altaria at 490, Shelgon at 420, Vibrava at 340, and Bagon at the lowest at 300. Bagon is a pure dragon type who originally debuted in Ruby and Sapphire, and was found in the Meteor Falls as a pretty rare encounter. Its first Pokedex entries say that it dreams of flying one day and will hurl itself off of cliffs or slam its head against rocks in frustration. Well, that's dark, but its head toughens up in the process. Statistically, it has the same total as Dratini with 300, a pattern we will continue to see. Its best stat is attack, with its worst being special defense. Its design is based on a dragon, as well as a Pachycephalosaurus, a dinosaur with domed heads, with it also looking like it has a mullet. Well, that's it right there. Bagon is the weakest dragon of them all. It has a mullet. It's been great, y'all. The name Bagon is a combination of baby and dragon. It evolves into Shelgon at level 30 and Salamence at 50. So the Bagon line really does parallel the Dratini line in many ways. They all share the same base stat total when they evolve and almost evolve at the same levels, except Shelgon evolves earlier than Dragonair does. Ruby and Sapphire really do have a lot of similar Pokemon and evolution lines to Red and Blue. And because Bagon eventually becomes Salamence, its moveset is quite good. Gen 3 introduced 2 new dragon moves of Dragon Claw and Dragon Dance, and Bagon does learn Dragon Claw as well as the previous move of Dragon Breath. It also naturally learns some fire and dark moves and can learn a ton of TMs. Gen 3 has some pretty sweet dragons though, so it's not like Bagon is a trash fire or anything. But it is the only base stage of a 3-part evolution in Gen 3 as well, therefore here we are. Generation 4. Gen 4 introduced 6 new dragon Pokemon: Gible, Gabite, Garchomp, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, 3 of these being legendary cover Pokemon, so they're obviously out of the running. Ranked statistically, it is a 3-way tie for first with those 3. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina all have a base total of 680, then Garchomp at 600, Gabite at 410, and Gible at 300. Another really easy one here. Gible is a dragon ground type who originally debuted in Diamond and Pearl, and is a pretty rare find in the Wayward Cave. Its original Pokédex entries state that it rests in small holes in cave walls to pounce on prey, and to avoid the cold, it lives in caves warmed by geothermal heat, and that it once lived in the tropics. Statistically, it has the same base 300 as Dratini and Bagon. I am certainly seeing a trend there. Its best stat is attack, with its worst being special attack. Its design is based on a hammerhead shark, or land shark, hence its ground typing. The name Gible is a combination of gobble and nibble. It evolves into Gabite at 24 and Garchomp at 48. So Gible being part ground type actually doesn't give it more type weaknesses, but it does make it 4 times weak to ice now. This is countered by it being immune to electric, however. Gen 4 introduced 5 more dragon moves, but Gible only learns Dragon Claw and Dragon Rush, and can learn Dragon Pulse in a TM. It also learns Dragon Rage naturally. Yet Dragon is now becoming a lot more versatile of a type, with a lot more moves added, which is now putting Gen 1 Dratini behind quite a bit, although they let Dratini catch up on Dragon moves with everyone else. But what Gible also has is the arsenal of rock and ground moves, and the option for a ton of TMs. Gible is actually pretty good, even still, but it certainly is weaker than the rest of its evolution line, and the 3 legendaries. Of the 4 I've discussed already, I personally think it's the second best, just behind Kingdra. Generation 5. For Gen 5, we get a plethora of new dragons, 10 to be exact. Axew, Fracture, Haxorus, Druddigon, Dino, Zweilous, Hydreigon, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. Statistically, the strongest to weakest are specifically Black and White Kyurem at a whopping 700 base total, then Reshiram and Zekrom at 680, regular Kyurem at 660, Hydreigon at 600, Haxorus at 540, Druddigon at 485, Zweilous at 420, Fracture at 410, Axew at 320, and our weakest one here, Dino, at the standard 300. Dino is a dark dragon type who debuted in Black and White as a rare late game find at Victory Road. Its original Pokédex entry states that it will tackle or bite anything in its surroundings due to it not being able to see, and that it is always covered in wounds. Well, now that's just depressing. We're keeping with the base 300 stat trend, with its best stat being attack and speed being its worst. Its design is based on a juvenile dragon, a sauropod, and a cave salamander due to its blindness and cave-dwelling habitat. The name Dino actually has a lot to it. It's a combination of dinosaur and ein, which is German for one. There is also the ancient Greek word dinos, meaning terrible, and Dino is the name of one of the 3 sisters in Greek mythology who share one eye, leaving 2 of them blind. I did not know any of this. It evolves into Zweilous at 50 and Hydreigon at 64. So Dino being part dark and part dragon puts its weakness and resistance chart all over the place. It's now weak to fighting, bug, ice, dragon, and 4 times weak to fairy, eventually. But also because of its dark typing, it resists ghost and dark, on top of its already resistance to fire, water, grass, and electric from its dragon typing, and it is immune to psychic. It resists the same amount of types that would damage it normally. It's like all or nothing with this line. But man, it learns a lot of strong moves, even in Gen 5 alone. 5 dragon moves of Dragon Rage, Dragon Breath, Dragon Pulse, Dragon Rush, and Outrage. 4 of these before would even evolve into Zweilous. And for dark moves, it learns Bite and Crunch, because that makes sense. Yet Dino is actually kind of a beast in comparison to the other weak dragons. Dratini's Gen 1 moveset is looking absolutely lame by this point. But even still, Dino does end up being the weakest in Gen 5 statistically, just barely below Axew. Generation 6. On to Gen 6, and now things are starting to get just a tad more complicated thanks to the Mega Evolution. Our new Dragon Pokemon here are Dragalge, Tyrant, Tyrantrum, Goomy, Sliggoo, Goodra, Noibat, Noivern, Zygarde, with the Mega Evolutions of Mega Charizard X, Mega Ampharos, Mega Latias, Mega Latios, Mega Garchomp, Mega Sceptile, Mega Altaria, Mega Salamence, and Mega Rayquaza. Good lordy lord. I'll only mention those because obviously none of the Mega ones are going to be even close to the weakest, so let's just discuss our new ones here. So from strongest to weakness, we get Zygarde's complete form at 708, then a tie between Zygarde's 50% form and Goodra at 600, then Noivern at 535, Tyrantrum at 521, Dragalge at 494, Zygarde's 10% form at 486, Sliggoo at 452, Tyrunt at 362, Goomy at 300, and then, for the first time, there is a dragon lower than 300, Noibat at only 245. Noibat is a flying dragon type who first debuted in X and Y in actually 3 different places: Terminus Cave, Victory Road, and in the dragon type Friend Safari. But they're actually still decently rare encounters in these areas. Its original Pokédex entry states that their enormous ears can emit ultrasonic waves of 200,000 Hz, which can apparently even make a robust wrestler dizzy and unable to stand. Weird reference, but alright. They also live in pitch black caves because, they're bats. Its best stat is its speed, with attack being its worst, but generally it's somewhat even across the board. Its design is based on a bat, a baby wyvern, and speakers. The name Noibat is a combination of noise and bat, obviously. It evolves into Noivern at level 48. So finally we get our actual weakest dragon to date at a lowly 245. For reference, it has the same base stat total as Zubat and Togepi, so take that how you will. I actually really like Noibat though. I think it's a really cool bat design, and I would say I prefer it to Zubat and Woobat. But also, because of its part flying type, it gets the additional weakness to rock and is now 4 times weak to ice. However, it now resists fighting and bug, but brings the normal electric weakness back to normal and is immune to ground. And also, Gen 6 introduced the fairy type, which is the enemy of the dragons. But as far as its normal moveset, it actually doesn't naturally learn any dragon moves, but 7 flying ones. It actually can't learn any dragon moves by TM even until Gen 9, which is pretty crazy really. It wasn't impossible for Noibat to know any dragon moves though, as it could through breeding and tutoring, so that's something. But because of all this, I think Noibat has to be the weakest dragon up to this point. Let's see if any Pokemon overtake it, or undertake it, whatever. Generation 7. For Gen 7, we get some fun ones. Turtonator, Drampa, Jangmo-o, Hakamo-o, Como-o, Guzzlord, Naganadel, Ultra Necrozma, and Alolan Executor. From strongest to weakest, we get Ultra Necrozma at 754, Como-o at 600, Guzzlord at 570, Naganadel at 540, Alolan Executor at 530, Drampa and Turtonator both at 485, Hakamo-o at 420, and then our star here, Jangmo-o at our base 300. Jangmo-o is a pure dragon type who debuted in Sun and Moon as a rare find in Fast Pony Canyon. Its original Pokédex entry says that they live in mountains away from humans and that they express their feelings by smacking their scales. Its best stat is defense, with HP, special attack, special defense, and speed all being tied for the lowest. Its design is simply based on the Ankylosaur. The name Jangmo-o is a combination of jangling and mo-o, which is Hawaiian for lizard or dragon. It evolves into Hakamo-o at 35, and then Como-o at 45. Yeah, this is pretty much another case of the standard 300 base dragon for the generation. Aside from Kingdra in Gen 2 and Noibat in Gen 6, the rest are all pretty comparable to each other, and Jangmo-o is no exception here. We are back to it being pure dragon though, so there's no change in its weakness or resistance. Move-wise, it learns Dragon Tail, Dragon Claw, Dragon Dance, and Outrage, as well as some normal moves and 1 steal of Iron Defense. To be honest, there really isn't much more to it. It's just really another first stage of a Part 3 Dragon evolution. Generation 8. For Gen 8, we get even more strange ones. Applin, Flapple, Appleton, Dracozolt, Dracovish, Duraludon, Dreepy, Dracloak, Dragapult, Eternatus, Regidrago, Hisuian Sliggoo, Hisuian Goodra, and then the Gigantamax forms of Flapple, Appleton, Duraludon, and then the Eternamax form of Eternatus. Yeah, we've come a long way. So obviously the Gigantamax forms and Eternamax form of Eternatus are going to be way overpowered. That thing has a base stat total of 1125. I mean, my god. But going from strongest to weakest, we get Eternatus at 690, Hisuian Goodra and Dragapult at 600, Regidrago at 580, Duraludon at 535, Dracozolt and Dracovish at 505, Flapple and Appleton at 485, Hisuian Sliggoo at 452, Dracloak at 410, and then there are actually 2 sub 300 ones competing for the worst. We have Dreepy at 270, and then coming in last is Applin at only 260. Still higher than Noibat though. Applin is a grass dragon type who debuted in Sword and Shield and is found in multiple places, even pretty early on. Its original Pokédex entry says that it spends its entire life inside of an apple to hide from birds. The apple is its food source, and the flavor determines its evolution. Its best stat is easily defense, with its worst easily being speed. And there's actually a lot going on with its design. There's the concept of a worm burrowing into an apple, as well as the larvae of various moths. Also the mole lizard. It being worm-like could be seen as a pun on a worm, a type of dragon, and the Ladon, a dragon from Greek mythology that guarded golden apples. Also, perhaps the serpent who persuaded Eve to eat the apple in the Garden of Eden in the Bible. The name Applin is really just combining the words apple and in. It evolves in multiple ways with different paths as well. Flapple when exposed to a tart apple, Appleton when exposed to a sweet apple, or Dipplin when exposed to a syrupy apple, in which Dipplin can also evolve into Hydrapple, but the Dipplin line is a Gen 9 edition. Applin is a pretty interesting one, really, and I think a lot of people hate it. You probably wouldn't immediately think it's a dragon type just by looking at it, but here we are. It being a grass dragon type also does give it quite a few weaknesses. Flying, poison, bug, dragon, fairy, and a 4 times weakness to ice. It now only resists ground, water, grass, and electric with no immunities. I think in that sense, you could argue that Applin is the single weakest dragon in the series, as even though Noibat has a 15-point lower base stat total, the type effectiveness chart is just worse with Applin. But then that brings us to its moveset, and here is where the nail hits the coffin. Not including breeding or tutoring, it literally only learns Withdraw and Astonish, and the only TM it can learn is Attract, at least in Gen 8. I would say that pretty much seals it all right there, not even seeing what Gen 9 has to offer. Applin is the single weakest dragon in the Pokemon series. Generation 9. In our final generation to date, Gen 9 introduced us to Cyclizar, Tatsugiri, Frigibax, Arctibax, Baxcalibur, Roaring Moon, Koraidon, Miraidon, Walking Wake, Dipplin, Archaludon, Hydrapple, Gouging Fire, and finally Raging Bolt, at least at the time of me making this video. Going from strongest to weakest for the last time, we get Miraidon and Koraidon at 670, Archaludon and Baxcalibur at 600, Raging Bolt, Gouging Fire, and Walking Wake all at 590, Hydrapple at 540, Cyclizar at 501, Dipplin at 485, Tatsugiri at 475, Arctibax at 423, and finally Frigibax at 320. Frigibax is a dragon ice type who debuted in Scarlet and Violet in the Dalizapa Passage and Glacedo Mountain. Its Pokédex entry says that it absorbs heat through its dorsal fin to convert into energy and cool its nest, and that it lives in forest and craggy areas. Its best stat is attack, with its worst being special attack. Its design is based on a baby concavinator dinosaur, as its crest is hypothesized to be a tool of thermoregulation. Also the kaiju, like a baby Godzilla. The name Frigibax is a combination of frigid, back, and axe. It evolves into Arctibax at 35 and Baxcalibur at 54. So yeah, Frigibax might statistically be the weakest Gen 9 dragon, but it's certainly not bad at all. Its ice typing does make it weak to fighting, rock, and steel, in addition to dragon and fairy, but that also negates the ice weakness. It only resists water, grass, and electric. But its moveset is honestly pretty great. It almost only learns attacking moves, with Leer and Focus Energy being the only two that don't deal damage. It learns a variety of dragon, ice, and dark moves. So because of this, and its slightly higher base stat total than normal, Frigibax really isn't bad. So that leaves us with our final ranking per generation. From strongest to weakest, we get Kingdra with a base stat total of 540, Frigibax at 320, a 5-way tie with Dratini, Bagon, Gible, Dino, and Jangmo-O at 300, Applin at 260, and Noibat at 245. And I still say Applin is easily the weakest of all of them, but that's more about what it becomes, kinda channeling a little bit of Magikarp there. I truly did not know what the results of this video were going to be before writing these out, so it's kind of a surprise. I've never used an Applin on any of my teams, so I didn't even know about its very limited moveset. But really, that just shows how strong the Dragon type really is. If I were to do this with every type, there would be much different results. The majority of these have a base total of 300, so I mean, I'd say the Dragon type is doing pretty well for itself. It's never really been one of my favorite types. In fact, I'd probably say it's one of my least favorite types overall, but that doesn't mean most of these Pokemon aren't formidable in battle. I believe the single highest base stat total in the entire series is a Dragon type with Eternamax Eternatus, and the second highest is Mega Rayquaza, so there we go. What I do want to do real quick is not necessarily do a personal favorite top 10 list, but at least list off a couple Dragon Pokemon that I do love. In no order, my personal favorites are Altaria, Rayquaza, Flygon, Hydreigon, and Noibat. I think they're all pretty top tier designs. Some honorable mentions that are ones I think are good but I don't love are Dragonair, Axew, Haxorus, Goomy, Zygarde, Noivern, and I kinda did grow to like Koraidon as I played through Scarlet. The rest of the dragons are either fine or indifferent for me. I don't really have any strong opinions, but there aren't any that I outright hate. I've never been a fan of Dragonite, and most of the legendaries really don't do much for me. Rayquaza will always be the biggest exception there though. What a top tier design. So yeah, I think that about does it for going over the weakest dragons. Is there something that I absolutely missed? Again, I researched all of this as I wrote it, so I tried to be as thorough as possible. It was kind of fun going through each generation though to see the evolution of the type too. It's crazy that after the first 2 generations, there were only 4 total dragon Pokemon. I think that could be a reason why I never gravitated toward the type. So I want to thank my wonderful Patreon people here as always. You guys are the best. But that doesn't mean the rest of you are the worst though. Even giving me your time by watching this video is greatly appreciated. If you ever want to wear a Paraspectre shirt to your next formal dinner, check out my bonfire page too. I'll see you all again, and also for this little side series next year for the Year of the Snake. Oh, sorry, Sneck. Paraspectre will return.